Okay, and I believe we are ready to go. So, good evening, good morning, wherever you may happen to be. Thank you for joining me. Apologies for the shuffling around of times this week. It's in fact, two of our friends came over. The writer Michael Marshall Smith and his wife Paula Granger, good dear friends of ours, both Brits. And usually, when we're hanging around with my wife and two other Brits, everybody is having it large, and the parties go late into the night. So, as a result, I moved back the time. As it turned out, they couldn't stay super late tonight, so they went home about 12 o'clock or so, and I realized I could have done the show perfectly normally or done the reading or whatever you want to call it. But I believe in better safe than sorry, so here I am. It just means I had an hour to kill instead. So, good to see you all. A pleasure, as always, or good to see you virtually. Anything to report from our end? Not just the usual madness of trying to make a living in a dying art form, in a very what's the word I'm looking for? An limping, fractionated century so far. But, hey, that's been true for the last 30 years in one way or another. So no complaints. Still working on all the books, trying to do also other stuff related to the upcoming publications. So PR related stuff and things like that. Not really a huge amount to recap or tell anybody about in terms of things. We're just hanging out here. So when we had some friends over and we hung out in the gazebo, that's what we did. So I am here, however, and I'm going to read. But first, I'm going to say hello to everyone. The romper room portion of the evening for those of you who are really old like me. So who's here? Olaf is here. Oh, always good to see you, Olaf. Pleasure. Ron, same thing. Hello, buddy. Mark. Good morning, Mark, and morning to everybody else in out in sunny Yorkshire with you. I'm glad it's sunny. That's a nice thing. Wouter, good evening. Good morning to you back. And Holger, hello. Good to see you too. Yes, the party was very nice. It was there. They're both, not only are they both very fine human beings, but they're also just great fun. Really nice people. You always have certain people in your life that are really good to spend time with. And for me, there's I have a few, definitely, and they are most definitely in the list. The kind of people that I actually feel better after I've been hanging out with them, which may sound odd because like all friends should be that way, and certainly all my important friends are, all our important friends. But there are lots of other people too that just for the way I am, I've always, that I sometimes feel like, oh, whenever I do things socially, I'm exerting a lot of energy. So I really value the people who make me feel like I'm getting something back, not in the sense of anything concrete, but I mean just in the sense of I don't have to work to socialize, and I just can just hang out and yeah, I don't know. It's hard to explain, but so anyway, but that's certainly my one of my measurements for the people that are really meaningful to me are the people that I don't think of it as doing something or working or even the normal work of socializing. I'm getting less social as I get older, and also I just have so much work to do. I'm always kind of like, oh God, yes, I should go do this, but I really need to work on this and that. So when I do have time, so I'm honestly looking forward to doing something with people, then it's always a really good thing. So yes, it was a good evening. Always good. Who else? Jeremy. Hello, Jeremy. Good to see you. Mahmoud. Hello and good morning to you too. I can see already that I'm just by being back to the older hour that I'm a little less articulate. So who else? Chris. Hello. Good morning, Chris. Kristen. Good to see you. Carol. Very nice to see you too. And now everybody's saying hello to each other. Cindy. Hello, Cindy. Good to see you. We're well here. If that's me you're talking to, yeah, we're all doing well. Everybody healthy. Nobody with any dreadful infectious diseases that I know of. So we're hanging in. Danielle, hello. Good to see you too. And Tammy, hey ya, back to ya. James D. Scott. You got all those names, James. You're James with many names. And g'day. Yeah, you've been panicking and nearly forgot. Never panic. That's the whole thing. That's the only thing I can tell you that comes with the wisdom of extreme age. Don't bother panicking because something else is going to happen that'll be just as panic-inducing within a matter of days or weeks. So you don't want to shoot all your panicking wad at you don't want to spend everything you've got in the panic bank. So just don't panic. Just don't panic. Just say, life is being lifelike again. Ilva, hello, sweetie. Good to see you. And I think now, yes, everybody's just saying hello to everybody else at this point. So, excuse me. Anyway, good to have you all here. What I want to do is start reading. I'm trying to think of what. Okay, so last week on Sunday night, the later one, we read 2 more chapters. And so we're reading Dragons of Ordinary Farm, of course. Yes, Dragons of Ordinary Farm by Tad Williams and Deborah Beale. See, there's Deborah. Whoop, 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 down there at the bottom. But so am I. And in chapter 3, they arrived at the farm and met a few of the people there, especially the Needles, Colin Needle and his mother, Patience Needle. And they were told basically, okay, now that you're here, don't go out of the house. Don't go anywhere without people taking care of you. This is a farm. There are dangerous animals around. Well, Tyler, the younger of the 2 siblings, Tyler and Lucinda Jenkins, Tyler decided that he wasn't going to do that. And he also saw the monkey that Lucinda had seen earlier, except he noticed this time that the monkey actually had wings. So that got him interested in what was going on outside. And then there was also a terrible roar from what's called the sick barn. And he went out to go discover what that was, and went sneaking around and found the sick barn, which is a big, like a concrete half tube, but a very large building. And he crept up on it. And at the last moment, just when he noticed that the large thing he couldn't see past, which he thought was a pile of feed bags or something, turned out to be something that was moving. And just at that moment, he was so alarmed, as I recall, he fell off. No, he was grabbed. He was being pulled. Anyway, he started to fall. Somebody grabbed him. It was Mr. Walkwell, one of the strange denizens of the farm, the one who came to pick them up. And Mr. Walkwell was clearly angry. Anyway, so that's where we were. That Tyler has stumbled onto something at the sick barn, and Mr. Walkwell has grabbed him and is unhappy with him. Now we are going to read chapter 5, and that, I believe, is a picture of Gideon because of the striped bathrobe. So I thought I would share that with you. So chapter 5, and the title is Meseret. Meseret. M-E-S-E-R-E-T. Meseret. Go away, Tyler, Lucinda said, but the person at the door only knocked again, louder. I already told you. Leave me alone. Lucinda Jenkins, open up, please. It wasn't Tyler, but a deep-voiced man. She jumped out of bed and pulled on her jeans. She worried for a moment about opening the door to a stranger, but he didn't ask again, and somehow that reassured her. The stranger was a big, bearded, fair-haired man in overalls. He looked fit and very muscular, but his whiskers and long hair were both streaked with gray, and the deep wrinkles around his eyes and on his forehead suggested he was at least her father's age, if not older. You'd better come down, he said. Your brother is in trouble. Because of his accent, it took her a moment to understand. Then panic exploded through her. Oh, is he hurt? The bearded man shook his head slowly. She couldn't figure out his expression. Was he hiding a smile or something less pleasant? He had a couple of old pale scars on his cheeks, which made her nervous. Not hurt, but I think you must come down. She didn't know what to do. She didn't know this man at all. Their first night in the middle of nowhere, and what had her dumb brother gotten into? I'm not supposed to go anywhere with strangers, He looked at her hard for a moment. Then he really did smile. The scars disappeared into the crinkly lines around his eyes, and it changed his whole face into something much, much nicer. Fairly spoken, Lucinda Jenkins. Ragnar Lodbrok is my name. Now we are not strangers. But I still don't know you, he laughed. And I do not know you, but I will trust you not to harm me. Still, we go downstairs only to the kitchen, and perhaps then one of the women there will speak for me. Yes? She felt a little better, although she kept some distance between them as she followed him out the door. What happened? What did Tyler do? What boys do. Ragnar didn't seem too put out about it. But it was not yet time. Time for what? He shrugged his broad shoulders. The bearded man reminded her a little of the Scarecrow in the old Wizard of Oz movie. He had an almost boneless way of moving, but the Scarecrow hadn't been anywhere near so broad across the back. Scarecrow probably didn't have tattoos like that either, she thought. She'd just noticed spikes of blue-black ink sticking up past Ragnar's shirt collar. Mrs. Needle was waiting at the bottom of the stairs, pulling a sweater on over her thin shoulders. You found her, I see, she said to Ragnar. I'll say it again, I don't think you should bring her. This will be difficult enough. Ragnar nodded, but under his polite reply his voice was hard. There was some sort of power struggle between these two, Lucinda guessed, an old one. Yes, but this secret is broken. She may as well learn now. His words frightened Lucinda so much that her knees went weak. Had that grumpy joke she shared with Tyler been right after all? Was this some kind of weird cult like she'd seen on so many TV shows? Were she and Tyler about to be given the chance to join or be killed? They left by the front door and walked down the driveway, then cut back, skirting what looked like kitchen gardens, until, in the distance, they saw the big white tube-shaped building she had seen earlier, lit up now like an airport at night. Fearful, she slowed down, but Ragnar's strong hand closed on her arm, gently but unbreakably firm, and kept her moving. Long before they reached the building, she could see two figures standing and waiting for them, one big, one small. Her flutter of relief lasted only a moment. The way Mr. Walkwell's hand sat on her brother's shoulder made it look like he was a prison guard and Tyler was a criminal. At least she thought the small shape was Tyler. It looked just like him, except for one thing, the expression on his face. Her brother was pale as a piece of printer paper and looked absolutely terrified. She'd never seen him that way. Lucinda was getting more frightened by the second. Mr. Walkwell let go of Tyler and walked forward to meet Ragnar and Mrs. Needle. Lucinda hurried over to Tyler. What did you do? She whispered. There's a monster in there, he told her, eyes wide, lower lip trembling. I'm not lying, Luce. A real honest-to-God monster. Well, here you two are, said a man's voice from behind them, dry and sour. Tyler and Lucinda Jenkins. Welcome to the farm, I suppose. I hadn't planned our first meeting to be quite so dramatic. Lucinda whirled around, startled. Hobbling up the path toward them from the other end of the house was a strange-looking old man in a red and white striped bathrobe. He was tall and thin, with a crest of white hair that stuck up as though he'd just got out of bed. And even under the spotlights, he looked as tan and wrinkled as the leather of Tyler's old baseball glove. Are you our Uncle Gideon? She asked. Your great-uncle, to be technical, but I think Uncle Gideon will do. He narrowed his eyes. And despite the more relaxed attitude these days about choosing names for children, I'm going to assume that you, girl, are Lucinda, and that this young ne'er-do-well is Tyler. There's a monster in there, Tyler said. In that sick barn place. A dinosaur. Gideon Goldring stared at them in silence for a long moment. "I'm not happy about this," he said at last, and made a noise in the back of his throat. "I don't like nosy Parkers prying into my business." He gave Tyler a fierce look, actually glared at him. Despite being frightened, Lucinda felt a moment of anger. "If you don't want people nosing around," she thought, "you shouldn't invite them somewhere and then get all mysterious." She didn't dare say it out loud, of course. "But here we are," the fierce old man said, "so I suppose I don't have much choice. No, it's not a dinosaur boy. It's something much more interesting. And her name is Meseret." Uncle Gideon pulled a pair of glasses that were little more than 2 lenses out of the pocket of his bathrobe and inspected Tyler's face like a doctor examining a particularly interesting wart. "Yes, you look a bit shocked. No surprise there, but no less than you deserve. I shouldn't reward you for being a troublemaker, but if I send you two back to the house now, we'll just have to do this some other time," he snorted. "Children." Gideon turned his attention to Lucinda, then back to Tyler again, as if he was making some huge decision. "Well, do you want to see her properly? Do you want to meet Meseret?" Tyler stared back at him, and then slowly nodded his head. "That thing in there? Yeah, sure." "What is going on here?" Lucinda almost screamed. "Will someone please explain it to me?" "We're right here, child," said Mrs. Needle with more than a touch of impatience. "There's no need to shout." "Oh, there probably is," said Uncle Gideon, and he laughed, a sort of cracked hiss that didn't make Lucinda feel much better at all. "Come along, then, all of you. Follow Simos, if you would be so kind." Simos was apparently Mr. Walkwell. Tyler and Lucinda followed him as he scrunched his way around the front of the sick barn to a heavy metal door. As before, he sounded like he was walking on packing material, but he was on the same soft dirt as the rest of them, and he was the only one making noise. When they reached the door, Mr. Walkwell opened a little cabinet beside it and punched numbers into a keypad inside, as though this was some kind of top-secret missile base out of a spy show. The doors swung open silently, and Mr. Walkwell stepped into bright fluorescent light. Tyler stared in, his pale face suddenly reluctant. Lucinda felt a sudden urge to take his hand, as she used to when he was still her little brother, instead of the irritating kid with the headphones who lived across the hall. She stepped forward, but as soon as she touched his hand, he pulled away and walked into the sick barn. Lucinda followed a little more slowly. She would never forget how the place looked in those first moments. A long room that seemed to stretch for a city block, with a dozen banks of lights hanging from a grid of pipes beneath the curved ceiling. Stainless steel tables stretched along one side of it, and the walls and shelves and open spaces were cluttered with bags of supplies and gasoline cans and cabinets full of tools, so that the place almost looked more like a garage than anything to do with animals. Lucinda would never forget how it smelled either. That weird mixture of a doctor's office and a zoo on the hottest day of summer. It made her eyes water. But, as impressive as it all was, she would never be able to remember exactly how it felt to see Meseret for the first time. Some things were so powerful that as soon as they came into your life, they changed you completely. Changed everything, so that the you who was trying to remember was just too different from the you who hadn't known. It felt like she was in a movie, one of those special effects epics that she had to go see when it was Tyler's turn to pick. Lucinda was looking at a stretched out shape that almost entirely filled the massive steel pen running down the far side of the room, a scaly shape the size of a small jet plane. Even though she had been expecting something to fit Tyler's word, monster, the brain couldn't make sense of the immense thing in front of her. It was A giant robot, maybe, some kind of theme park attraction, but it couldn't be real. It lifted its huge head on its huge neck and looked back at her with snaky yellow eyes almost as big as hubcaps. Nothing else, Lucinda found out, was as convincing as actual eye contact. Her shrieks didn't seem to bother the creature much. Its yellow eyes followed her, but without much obvious interest, as she stumbled backward toward the door and slammed into Colin Needle, who had just walked into the sick barn. She fell down at Colin's feet, still staring helplessly at the monster and trying to remember how to breathe. He didn't bother to help her up, but the big farmhand, Ragnar, did. "Don't fear," Ragnar said. "She will not harm you." "It's a monster!" Lucinda shouted. "See? I told you!" Tyler had stopped a good dozen feet from the pen to stare, which was clear evidence of how frightened he still was. But he was shaky with excitement, too. "See? It is a real dinosaur! I wasn't lying!" "Don't be stupid," Colin said. "That's not a dinosaur." "Have you children forgotten all the stories?" Ragnar sounded almost sad. The monster in the pen stirred, and the immense leathery flaps folded against her long front legs scraped along her scales. Wings. "Oh, my God," said Lucinda, almost in a whisper, not talking to anyone but herself. "It's a dragon. It's a real, true dragon?" Colin pushed past her. "Why are you showing them the sick barn?" he demanded of Ragnar. "Why didn't anyone tell me you were all coming here? I'm going to tell Gideon." "He's here," said Mrs. Needle, pointing to the corner of the room where the old man in the striped bathrobe was talking quietly with Mr. Rockwell. "And we didn't tell you because I thought you needed your rest." Colin scowled like a 3-year-old about to throw a tantrum, but turned away instead. Uncle Gideon was coming back toward them, but Lucinda didn't think that was the only reason Colin wasn't arguing with his mother. Gideon's voice rose sharply and suddenly. "Here now, boy, what's your name? Tyler. Don't get too close to her. She hasn't been feeling well." Tyler had been moving steadily forward, drawn toward the huge creature as though hypnotized. He looked like he was over his fear and into his "I wonder how it works" phase, something that usually spelled trouble for anything that interested him. Lucinda felt a clutch of fear. If he got eaten, how would she explain it to Mom? It really was a dragon. There was no avoiding the fact, no arguing with it. Lucinda couldn't see every detail because much of the creature's body was hidden by the metal rails of the pen, but unless there was some normal kind of animal, longer than a school bus, that had scales and fangs and wings, then she, Lucinda Ann Jenkins, was standing in the same room as a dragon, she said again, loud this time, finally starting to feel the wonder of it all. "She certainly is," Uncle Gideon said. "I will introduce you to her. And I do mean introduce. This is a dragon, not just some kind of giant lizard or crocodile. You must treat her with respect. Her name is Meseret." "Unbelievable!" Tyler was bouncing up and down again. "This is so awesome! Where did she come from?" Uncle Gideon scowled. "That, at least, you're going to have to wait for, until I'm ready, boy." He was still frowning as he said, "Now step forward carefully. That's right, just stand and let her smell you." Tyler and Lucinda had moved up to within a couple of feet of the bars. The dragon's nostrils twitched like little volcanoes getting ready to erupt. It was all Lucinda could do not to run away. The smell, the size, she was terrified. "Move slowly and quietly, will you?" said Gideon. "She has very little experience of human children. In fact, as far as we know before today, she hasn't met any except Colin." Poor dragon, said Tyler, too quietly for anyone but Lucinda to hear. The dragon fixed Lucinda with an emotionless stare. The huge eye glowed with red gold light like the coals of a fire, and for a moment it seemed something Lucinda could fall into, fall forever, twisting helplessly downward. She backed away, knowing that if she didn't, she'd scream again. This is too weird, she said. Everybody here's acting like this is all normal, like it's ordinary, asked Uncle Gideon, the light winking off his spectacles. He looked amused and angry at the same time, a strange combination. Yes, I am afraid the name of the farm is a trifle deceptive. Oh, man, flaming cows, Tyler said, laughing a little wildly. Flaming cows! Now I get it. Uncle Gideon nodded. Ah, you did receive the book then. I was worried I'd missed getting it into the mail in time. Good. Now, obviously, it's not really about cows, and I do want you to memorize it. They're not at all like ordinary animals, dragons. Lucinda felt like her head was going to blow up. But this can't be real. If this was really true, it would be in the news. People would know. It would be on television. Without warning, something grabbed her arm, and a second later, she and Tyler were both being dragged across the sick barn by Uncle Gideon. He was holding her wrist so tightly her bones ached, and his face had gone red with anger. When they got out into the glare of the outside spotlights, he abruptly let go. They both staggered. From the corner of her eye, Lucinda registered the others coming out of the sick barn, too, but no one said anything. Gideon stood in front of them, and he didn't just look like an eccentric old man in a bathrobe anymore. He looked really mad and really scary. Now, you listen to me, he said in a voice that trembled with fury. You have no idea, I tell you, of the great privilege you have received in being invited to this place. And yet I find that the first thing you two do when you get here is abuse my hospitality. You, boy, do exactly what you are told not to do. You were told not to leave the house, weren't you? I warned him, sir, said Colin. He sounded pleased. And then you, girl, start telling me this place should be on television. Gideon made a sputtering noise like a snake about to bite. You have been here 5 minutes, and you would give away our hard-won secrets to a society of idiots and thieves, would you? No, I didn't, she began, but there was no stopping Gideon Goldring. I cannot tell you how deeply disappointed I am in my first impressions of you both. Moreover, you just confirm my worst fears. Once people have been allowed into Ordinary Farm, there's no control at all. Yes, children, if you haven't guessed, I am very, very angry. Tears sprang into Lucinda's eyes, and her heart hammered. She looked to Tyler, but he had his head down, avoiding Uncle Gideon's eyes. Her little brother wouldn't argue, but he wouldn't give in either. He was too stubborn for that. Give me your hands, Gideon said, suddenly and loudly. Right now, you are going to swear me an oath. Lucinda saw the mouths of some of the others fall open in shock. She looked at Tyler. Now! Roared Gideon. They did so. Somehow there seemed nothing else they could do. Lucinda heard distant birds in the trees, a breeze ruffling leaves, the ragged breathing of this terrible man, their great uncle. Promise me, said Gideon. Swear on everything you hold sacred that you will never, never betray the secrets of Ordinary Farm to the outside world. The old man's grip was so tight that she could feel him trembling, and she suddenly had the feeling that he was more than just angry. Gideon Goldring was frightened, really seriously frightened that they might tell people about the farm. An odd calm came over her. Yes, she said, I promise. Tyler didn't say anything for a moment. As long as you don't try to hurt me or my sister, he said at last. "Remember, you asked us to come here." Gideon let go of their hands. He sounded surprised. "Hurt you? You are my relatives. You are family." "Okay, then, I promise." Another silence fell. When Lucinda looked up at Gideon to see if he was getting over his anger, the heels of his hands were pressed over his eyes. "God!" he said suddenly. "Oh, God, my head!" Suddenly he swayed and almost fell. Mrs. Needle, black hair streaming, ran to his side. "Gideon, enough! You are still unwell. You must come away now and lie down." And she began to lead him to the house. Gideon leaned into her, hobbling and wiping at his eyes. "Just like Mom told us," Tyler said quietly. "Right, Lucinda? A nice old-fashioned summer on the farm." All right, now we start chapter 6, free-range muffins. And there's a lovely picture of some food and a basket, and food and a basket. And this chapter has muffins in it, which automatically makes it one of my favorite chapters. Chapter 6, free-range muffins. By the time they reached the grand lobby and its blind staircase, Colin could just barely hide his anger. Only a few hours on the farm, and these two interlopers were already getting special treatment. The boy, what was his name? Tyler, had immediately broken the rules, but instead of being sent home, they had both been rewarded. Already they had been shown the second biggest secret on the farm. Of course, Colin had known that having strangers on the farm would cause trouble, but who could have guessed it would have begun so quickly? Now he understood and could even sympathize with his mother's dark, cold rage when Gideon had announced it. His mother had taken Gideon upstairs, the old man stumbling like a sleepwalker. No matter how much medicine she gave him, Gideon didn't seem to get any better. That was strange. It wasn't like Patience Needle to come up short, although she hadn't had much luck with the female dragon either. It gave Colin a strange, slippery feeling, half joyful, half terrified, to think of his mother failing at something. At Colin's mother's order, Caesar came down from Gideon's room to lead the two Jenkins children back to their beds. Colin avoided the bent old black man. He had made the mistake once of referring to Caesar as a servant. What else would you call someone who took trays to Gideon, turned down his bed each night, and ran his bath and folded his clothes? But Caesar had turned on him. When the man straightened up, Colin had discovered Caesar was actually quite tall and more than a little frightening. "Don't you ever call me that," Caesar had said, his weary, wrinkled face twisting into something quite different. "I work for Mr. Goldring because work is all I know how to do, and because I owe him a big, big old favor. But I am no man's servant, not ever again. Do you hear me, child? Do you hear me?" All Colin had been able to do at the time was squeak a yes. He had done his best to avoid the fellow ever since. "Come, children," Caesar now said as he led Tyler and Lucinda away. "Must be tired, you two. Quite a day, quite a day. Ordinary farm ain't like other places, and now you know it. Enough to tire anyone out. Come along to bed." When they had gone, Colin stood in the silent lobby, too disturbed for bed, too full of irritated thoughts of anger. Gideon had actually had the nerve to suggest that Colin would enjoy having people his own age on the farm this summer. As if these two children were anything like him. As if he himself were a child instead of an adult in all but the official sense. Which is what any kid had to be if they were like Colin. A boy without a father, but also with a mother who never spoke about her previous life and treated Colin more like an assistant than a child. All in all, he hoped Gideon had learned a lesson about who he could trust and who he clearly couldn't. Colin Needle's attention was suddenly drawn to a rectangle of white sitting on a silver tray. It was the tray that Caesar used to carry upstairs the mail and other papers that Gideon needed to see. The old fellow had obviously been distracted by the afternoon's events and had left the tray with a small pile of undelivered mail out on a table near the door leading to the kitchen. Colin sidled over to look through the envelopes. Feed bills, equipment bills, a postcard for the brats from their mother, and a couple of letters from a lawyer. Colin didn't recognize the name, although this was by no means the first time he'd snooped in Gideon's correspondence. More bills, assessor's office, that would be taxes, lots of money going out as usual, but nothing coming in. No wonder Gideon was always half crazy with stress and worry. Ah, but what was this? Colin's heart beat faster as he recognized the gray envelope. He had been waiting, hoping for one of these. He cocked his head and listened to make sure nobody was coming, then lifted up the letter. The return address in the corner confirmed what he'd suspected. Jude Modesto, Antiquities, Santa Barbara, California. It was from the antiques dealer, the one Gideon was always so secretive about, although Colin had figured out their arrangement long ago. But far more important to him was the information inside, including the man's email address. Colin's mother and Caesar were still upstairs. The cook, Sarah, and her helpers would be here very soon to begin preparing dinner. At best, he had mere minutes. Colin slipped the gray envelope inside his sweater and hurried into the empty kitchen and straight toward the kettle. Steam coaxed the sealed envelope to open as neatly as one of the pale flowers in Colin's mother's garden, spreading its petals to the spring sunshine. He slipped out the letter and read it quickly. Dear Gideon, of course I'd be delighted to meet with you. I always enjoy your company and sharing in the miracle of your wonderful collection. In fact, I have a new buyer who is very interested in just the sort of items with which you've favored my little enterprise in the past. He will be thrilled if I am able to offer him more genuine gold rings, quote unquote. Of course, I call them that only to myself. I have kept your injunction to secrecy quite faithfully, I assure you. The letter went on like that for a few more paragraphs, full of all the slimy politeness that grown-ups used when they were pretending they wanted something other than simply to make money. When Colin grew up, he wasn't going to be such a hypocrite. When he wanted something, he'd say so. When he didn't like someone, the way he already didn't like Tyler Jenkins, he wouldn't bother to hide it. Of course, he would have to be in charge. You only got to make the rules and do what you wanted when you were in charge. His mother had taught him that from the first moments he could remember. Colin memorized the email address in Jude Modesto's personalized letterhead and sealed the letter back up, then made his stealthy way back out to the lobby. He had dropped the letter back onto the tray only a few moments before his mother reappeared, brushing straight black hair away from her pale forehead. This foolish plan of Gideon's is going to cause us all a great deal of grief, she said, then suddenly seemed to see her son properly for the first time since she had walked into the room. What are you doing, Colin? Are you loitering? I'm going to our rooms, Mother. He was desperate to get to the computer before he forgot the email address. I just need to make a note for later on, but I'll be right down after that if you need any help with dinner. She looked hard at him for a moment. Very well, but don't dilly-dally. I'm not in the mood to be cross this evening. A little shiver ran up his back. I'll be right back. Suddenly she smiled broadly, so that if Colin hadn't been able to see the rest of her distracted, chilly face, he would have felt quite warm and loved. That's my good boy. That's boy who knows how to behave toward his mother. She leaned forward as if to kiss his cheek, but stopped half a foot short, her dark lips smacking the air. Then she turned and walked out of the lobby, pulling out her keychain so she could begin locking up. Collins scuttled to the office in their rooms, and his own computer there, the one with all the security software, so that neither his mother, Gideon, nor anyone else at all could find out what he did. He quickly composed a letter to Modesto. Please forgive my contacting you this way. I am a business associate of Gideon Goldring, and I have certain things that will interest you, both information and an actual rare object. I know you are very interested in Mr. Goldring's collection. If you would like to learn much more than you have so far been told, I require only two things: a meeting with you and absolute secrecy. When you make your next appointment with Gideon, send me a message at this address to let me know where and when it will be, and I will arrange to meet you there beforehand so we can discuss things of great mutual interest. However, if you breathe a word to Mr. Goldring or anyone else about our arrangement, you will never hear from me again. Signed, X. Colin knew the note was probably a little melodramatic, but he still thought it sounded grown up and serious enough to keep the man interested. He already had what he thought of as a bait, an object that would surely provoke Modesto's interest. He had been saving it specially. Now all he had to figure out was how to deliver the actual prize. He had been thinking about the problem for weeks, but this next bit could be more than disastrous if it went wrong. It could be fatal. The best way, of course, would be to get someone else to do it. Weighing different strategies, Colin sent the email and made his way back to the kitchen. To his pleasure, his mother told him she had confined those brats to their rooms for the rest of the night, and had sent Caesar up with a tray of food and to stand over them till early morning, doing guard duty. Colin grinned to himself. That punished all three of them. For the rest of the evening, he meekly did everything she asked, and afterward she even patted him on the shoulder. Colin didn't like that. Only a little kid needed to be patted and reassured by his mother. He was stronger than that. That's why he was going places in this world. Still, it took him a while to get to sleep that night, and he was troubled by dreams of angry, vengeful monsters. Morning, and his mother's rap on the door sounded like a gunshot. Get up, Colin. It's almost 6 already. Go and get those children and bring them down to breakfast. Now, please. But I want to have a shout. Now? He got up, already in a bad mood. Barely dawn, and the unwanted strangers were causing trouble for him already. He hated to start the day, especially what was going to be a hot summer day, without a shower. By the middle of the afternoon, he would feel like things were growing on his sticky skin, like the clinging plants that had filled and choked off the farm's unused greenhouse. He pounded hard on Tyler Jenkins' door to wake him up. When the boy had gone grumbling off to the bathroom, his eyes half shut, Colin knocked a little less roughly on Lucinda's. She opened it, wearing only a long t-shirt, the skin of her legs almost as pale as his mother's. That wouldn't last long, he thought, not in ordinary farm's relentless summer sun. It's time to come down to breakfast, he told her. It's going to be a long day, so you need a good start. He felt stupid saying it, like one of those commercials for breakfast cereal, but he couldn't help feeling bad about dragging her out of bed. She looked tired and fretful. Of course, she had just met Meseret only a few hours before. He couldn't guess what that must be like for an outsider. Oh, thanks, Colin, she said. I'll be out in just a minute. She closed the door. She'd actually thanked him. Quite different from her brother, who emerged from the bathroom at that moment, the toilet still gurgling. What are you staring at? Tyler demanded. Not you, I promise. Can we see the dragon again? It's not for me to say. Look, just tell me how it got here then. I told you it's not for me to say, Colin sighed. Children. When you're both ready, I'll meet you at the top of the stairs down the hall and take you down to the dining room. He walked away, keeping his back as straight as he could. He'd show these urchins how to look dignified. If there was one thing his mother had made sure of, it was that Colin had good posture. He ignored the snorting noise Tyler made behind him. The boy was almost a savage, after all. 10 minutes later, still ignoring Tyler's endless questions, Colin led the Jenkins children into the kitchen, where he introduced them to the women preparing breakfast. Red-cheeked Sarah, blonde, round, and bustlingly warm, tall, superior Azinza from West Africa, and the little solemn-faced Tibetan girl, Pema. None of the young women liked him very much, Colin knew, but they all feared his mother, which kept them polite. Once names had been exchanged, he pulled the Jenkins children out of the kitchen and led them onward into the dining room with its long tables. Most of the farm hands were there already, and they turned to gaze with curiosity at the new arrivals. Colin led Lucinda and Tyler to the serving table. The spread was a good one this morning. Eggs of every kind, bacon, sausages, ham, hash brown potatoes, a platter of fried mushrooms and tomatoes, which Tyler Jenkins was careful to avoid, although he seemed to have taken more than a little of everything else, waffles, pancakes, and at least 5 or 6 different kinds of muffins. When they had loaded their plates, Colin looked around. The only empty space big enough for all 3 of them was next to Ragnar, so he reluctantly led them over. The big blonde-bearded man grinned and reached out to shake hands with the children. Their hands disappeared into his massive grasp like pink baby mice being swallowed whole by a python. Greetings to you both. Ragnar turned a less friendly look on Colin. And to you, young Needle. Where did that dragon come from? Tyler demanded. That is Gideon's story to tell, not mine, Ragnar said. Do you all live here on the farm? Lucinda asked. More farm hands were coming in now, although all but the kitchen workers were men. Gideon has generously given us homes, all as refugees, Ragnar explained. Colin tensed, afraid the man might say too much. Ragnar was far too full of himself. But the Scandinavian giant only turned to Mr. Walkwell, sitting at a nearby table. Isn't that right, Simos? The farm's overseer looked sour. You children, get on with the eating, was all he said. It is a long day ahead. Heck, Tyler, you've got enough syrup on your plate to float an ocean liner, Lucinda complained. Her brother ignored her and began to eat. Colin Needle realized that he was hungry too. Then, just as he bent to his plate, a cool hand closed on his shoulder. Ah, there you all are, his mother said. It was always the same feeling Colin's mother brought to him, part excitement, part worry. Had he made a mistake of some kind? He had done just what she'd asked, hadn't he? Do you mind if I join you? She asked the 2 guests. I'm looking forward to getting to know you both. She turned her smile on her son. Have you been showing our guests around? Yes, Mother. He's been very helpful, Mrs. Needle, said Lucinda. Colin suddenly decided that for an unwanted guest, the Jenkins girl was not so bad. Can I get you anything, Mother? Just some fruit and yogurt, dear, thank you. By the time Colin came back, she was doing her best to charm the Jenkins children, and her best could be quite impressive. Tyler did not look entirely convinced, but Lucinda seemed taken with his mother's accent, her careful, clever way of talking, and her occasional bright smiles. Colin found himself proud of his mother, proud that he was her son, that she had chosen to have him. Who needed a father, or even to know who his father had been? His mother could be difficult, it was true, but that was because she was special, a sort of genius. That was one of the reasons Colin felt so drawn to Octavio Tinker, the founder of Ordinary Farm. Genius had its own rules. Genius had to get its own way. You know, Lucinda, his mother was saying, you have such a charming face. She reached out her long fingers toward the girl. You should cut your hair shorter to show it off. A little startled, Lucinda leaned back suddenly and lifted her arm, knocking over a basket full of muffins that had been set down on the table beside her. The basket bounced, and the muffins leaped out, rolling across the floor. The little dark-haired farmhand, Haneb, who had been passing behind her, danced back with a cry of surprise and almost dropped his breakfast plate. Even as he did so, though, Haneb struggled to keep the left side of his face turned away and tried to shield it with a free hand, but this only ensured that some of the food slid from his plate and fell to the floor amid the now free-ranging muffins. Oh, I'm so sorry, said Lucinda as she jumped up. She began gathering muffins into the basket, and as she did so, she stuck out a hand toward Haneb. I'm really sorry. Hi, I'm Lucinda, and I'm a clumsy idiot, obviously. Suddenly she gave a horrified gasp and straightened up, stumbling back from the dark-haired man as though she had been struck. Haneb stared at her for a moment, both eyes wide and the good one blinking. The left half of his face was a mass of scars, the skin melted like candle wax, the eye pulled half shut. Colin had often thought that if the man had any concern for the feelings of others, he would wear a mask like the Phantom of the Opera, especially when people were eating. Haneb ducked his head and, without picking up any more of his breakfast, scuttled away toward Mr. Walkwell's table. Once seated, he began to eat quickly without looking up. Tyler hissed at her. Geez, Lucinda, treat that guy like Frankenstein much? She stared at him, embarrassed but also angry. It surprised me, that's all. She turned to Colin. Poor guy. What happened to him? Burned. Were these children going to blunder and crash through every little private matter on the farm? If so, it was going to be a very long summer. Whoa, said Tyler, interested for the first time. Really? What burned him? A shadow fell over them, a large shadow. Come along, you young ones, Ragnar said. The sun is almost at noon. Tyler looked at his watch. It isn't even 6:30 yet. On the farm, that is the middle of the day, Ragnar said cheerfully. Has anyone decided what chores these children are going to do? Colin asked. He had a sudden horror that Gideon might expect him to entertain these barbarians, to play with them, or some other impossibly childish idea. Work? Tyler blinked. Can't we see the dragon again? What was her name? Ragnar grinned. Meseret. You like dragons, do you? Then you have never met one on a windy mountainside, with nothing but an axe in your hand. He laughed. I do not think you will see more of the great she-worm today. She has been ill. But there are other things worth doing and seeing. I have good news for you, young Master Tyler. There shall be no work for you today. What? Said Colin. But everyone has to work. Not today, said Ragnar firmly. Gideon has decided that the safest thing is for the children to be taken on a tour of the farm, the better to stop any more unfortunate explorations. Colin's mouth fell open. Could anything be more unfair? But as for you, young Master Needle, Mr. Rockwell asks me to remind you he needs his feed budget. And will you please work with your mother to get it to him by the end of the day? So the children would get a tour of the farm while he was stuck with bookkeeping? Really? Colin asked miserably. Today? Today, Ragnar laid a big hand on Colin's shoulder, squeezing hard enough to make his point. You know, Mr. Rockwell does not joke. He turned to Lucinda and Tyler. No more wasting time, he said. Let us go. Bye, Colin, said Lucinda. Her brother grinned at him. Yeah, enjoy yourself. The three of them walked away. Seamus Rockwell and the farmhands filed out to their various jobs. His mother went off with the kitchen workers to supervise the making of the week's shopping list. Colin Needle was left alone with his oatmeal. It had gone cold. And we've only got about 3 minutes left. I think I'm going to stop there, but I will show you the next chapter because it will give away a little something, but it will also give you a little bit of a setup here. So this next chapter will be chapter 7, and it's called A Cloud of Horns. There, the picture comes into focus. A Cloud of Horns. And that's what we're going to be reading tomorrow night. So, with that, and as we now approach the top of the hour, I'm still trying to think if there's anything. I mean, I did come back last week, so there isn't a long gap to explain. The work life is work, you know. I'm deep into both Into the Narrow Dark and also The Navigator's Children, which, as I mentioned before, is very strange because instead of working on it as one book, I'm working on it as two halves of book, one half of which is going to be published before the other half. So although I need to work on both of them, I can't really do a lot of stuff in the last volume until I've finalized things. And when you've got, as I tend to in these big books, when you've got like 30 or 40 different plot lines going on at any one time, and they all have, you know, like they stretch out ahead in terms of what they're supposed to do or what I think they're going to do or what I'm planning for them to do and I'm trying to shape them toward. But until you know what happened in the first half of the book and you've locked it down by saying, okay, now this is my finished version, there are a lot of things that are still, you know, it's very Schrodinger's cat. Until those first half is locked down, no plot line in the last half is absolutely sacrosanct because it might change, you know, until the part in which I put Into the Narrow Dark to bed and I'm finished with it. So that's one of the weird things going on at the moment. It's not what I could do with the normal book if it was the entire length of the book, because I just keep working on it till I finished it at the end. In this case, no, I have to finish the first half of the book first. So it's a little confusing. So that's what I'm working on at the moment. I keep having ideas. This is another great tragedy of my life, my career. I keep having ideas for other books too. You know, I mean, it's not like they stop. I don't stop having ideas, but it's just a question of when and how, if ever, that I get a chance to write them. So I don't know. One of the things I'm thinking about in the future is I may actually write some shorter books, still longish, you know, by my standards, but just so that I can get through some of these ideas because I'm stacking up the ideas much faster than I can write them. You know, unlike Ernest Hemingway or whatever, I don't think anybody's going to come along after the fact and try and finish my unfinished books. And even with Hemingway, it wasn't particularly successful anyway. So that's what's going on here. I'm just working. We are, you know, taking care of the young people in the household and taking care of the animals and just waiting for everybody to get vaccinated so that, you know, we can have at least a few months of relative normality again in this world before the next variant comes along or whatever other god-awful catastrophe will beset us next, he says, smiling. Because, you know, life is life. You know, the people in the, 1914 didn't plan to have a 5-year war come along and change things. And people, in 1959 didn't think the Vietnam War was still going to be going on in 26 years and changing the entire fabric of several countries. And, none of us thought back in February or January of 2020 except for perhaps a few epidemiologists, that we might still be dealing with this thing and that it might have turned out to be as horrendous as it has. So you can't plan and you can't assume, but you also have to be a bit flexible. You know, you have to roll with the punches. You have to keep your sense of humor, God knows, because that's sometimes the only thing that helps us to get through and to move on. So that's my little pocket sermon for the night. I know none of you wanted that, but you got it anyway. With that, excuse me, I will wrap it up. So just to be clear, before you disappear, next week, back to the earlier time. Okay, this was a one-time thing. So for me, it was 2 o'clock in the morning tonight, whatever time it is where you are. Next week, it'll be back to 1 o'clock in the morning for me, and an hour earlier from today, or from tonight's or today's show for all of you folks listening. So that's what's going on. I hope things will continue and even get better for all of you, that you will take good care of yourselves because you are important. And if you were not here, lots of people would miss you, and I would be one of them because I wouldn't have anybody to talk to except for my poor, poor family. So take good care of yourselves. Take good care of those around you, especially your loved ones, your near and dear, but everybody may need a little help from time to time. Exercise patience when possible, and I will see you an hour earlier next week on Sunday. So again, thank you for joining me. Much